there's a sense of urgency that we all must do something.
We shouldn't feel defeated.
We can do it. Perpetual planet means protecting nature as if our lives depend on it.
We have to keep hope alive.
How can we use our skills to solve these global problems?
I love for my research to have an impact in the life of people.
It takes a collective effort from all of us to inspire, to educate.
Putting all the knowledge together.
Más gente involucrada, más gente.
We are not going to stop until we get the job done.
It was just the beginning. Fantastic.
All right, well, thank you to Rolex, who's one of our main sponsors for World Oceans Week and the club. So good afternoon. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. My name's Galen Rosenwax. I'm a fellow of the Explorers Club, and I have the great pleasure to welcome you to our global headquarters and to kick off our first of our ambassador hours, celebrating the most important fish in the sea, the mighty menhaden. Perhaps some of you saw two of the underwater menhaden photographs in the library, although I do think the doors are still closed, but afterwards check them out because they're two that I took because I'm completely obsessed with these beautiful fish. And fortunate enough to be an underwater photographer. If you're not, anyway, so a little bit about the Explorers Club is the Explorers Club is a multidisciplinary society dedicated to the advancement of field research, scientific exploration, and conservation. Our members are responsible for many of the famous firsts. There's a plaque downstairs that you can check out. There's everything from walking on the moon, reaching the summit of Mount Everest first, the North Pole, and diving to the deepest depths of the oceans, the Challenger Deep and the Mariana Trench. The club is rich in history, and I wish I could share more, but we have a lot to cover in this hour. So instead, I encourage you to explore our halls and to ask everyone questions, because the building is really a museum of exploration. In line with our history, it's our tradition to give challenge coins. And for the past 3 years, our educational partner, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, has held a contest to design a special World Oceans Week challenge coin. We are excited to have this year's winner with us this evening. Please welcome Mayurika Anthony, who's in the front row. She also rang the bell for anyone who didn't hear. She's a grade 4 student of Joya Holden from the Keystone School, and we will reveal her winning design at the end of the program. Congratulations. We're so excited to have you here. And now to an in-depth look at one of my favorite fish and the first of our ambassadors to be celebrated, the menhaden, also known for us locally as bunker. Last night, I learned that during the Chesapeake Hope Spot presentation that menhaden were very important to the native tribes of the Chesapeake, and the name menhaden is derived from an Algonquin word meaning he who nourishes the soil. In this hour, our esteemed experts will open your eyes to the world of menhaden with a comprehensive look at this incredible forage fish. But to begin the program, we're going to show a short film made specifically for tonight, made by Jacob Steinberg and Aaron Kornbluth, to set the stage for the presentations and the panel. So can we run the film? Thank you.
The Chesapeake Bay is a highly productive estuary. A lot of organisms find it a really easy place to grow, live, survive, reproduce. And a key part of that food source are small-bodied fish that we call forage fish.
These fish, they're called the most important fish in the sea, and there's a reason they're called that. But this is a fish that feeds all the other fish, striped bass, bluefish, trout, cobia, red drum, you name it. It also feeds mammals, dolphin, porpoise, whales, as well as seabirds.
There have been great environmental struggles to make sure that this fish is adequately managed for abundance. Many people want this fish, and ecologists want it out there to transfer the nutrients up the system.
The fishermen in New York do not want to go back to the days when we didn't have big schools of menhaden in our waters.
So I'll start by taking a long view, I think, and remind everyone that a century ago, menhaden fisheries occurred from Florida to New England. 100 years ago, there were menhaden processing plants up and down the coast, and it is contracted to being now really one menhaden processing plant. It also appears that the amount that they're catching, or the schools that they're catching, are much smaller than I would have thought they would have been. We've watched a dozen men on 2 purse boats pull in a net that doesn't really contain very many fish at all. If we take it as a random sample of all the possible days, it would suggest that the menhaden fleet are undergoing some tough times at the moment, that they're just not catching the number of fish that I would have expected to see going into holds for a sustainable, viable fishery.
I think people argue all the time about whether there's enough or how much they should take, or can they take more. You know, the fisheries scientists have a lot of very complicated formulas and approaches to trying to calculate it, but the easiest, simplest, real way is to say if you fish at the same intensity and your catches are dropping, then you're catching too much.
And if they're not catching them, then perhaps that lends weight to the concern that they aren't out there to be caught, because these are high-tech fishing operations. So if they're there, you would think they would be able to find them.
Whatever happens with menhaden, osprey will follow. I'm Brian Watts. I'm the professor of conservation biology and the director of the Center for Conservation Biology at William & Mary. We have worked with osprey here in the Chesapeake since 1970. There are just a number of characteristics of osprey that make them ideal as fish indicators. We can observe their behaviors, we can observe their nesting, we can look at what the outcome of nesting attempts are, and particularly here in the Chesapeake Bay, because we have such a thriving population of osprey and have historically, they are just ideal. Other characteristics that make osprey really great is that they are 100% dependent on fish, and they depend on fish to feed their young. It looks like, at least for some of the study areas, that they will not break even demographically, so they will not produce enough young to offset adult mortality. And so they effectively enter a death spiral. They are not able to sustain themselves. And without immigration from outside populations, those populations would decline. What it reflects is if the menhaden abundance was higher in terms of availability to osprey, they would be doing fine.
So right now we're in the western bays of Nassau County off of Freeport, New York. There's a sign when you pull into Freeport that says fishing and boating capital of the East. It's certainly something that I think about when I pass it. I think New York is a great example. What happened when we started to get the fish coming back in the around 2013, 14, 15, people recognized it was really more important for us to have those fish in the water than to see them taken out. We were able to build a coalition that included the guys who harvest menhaden for a living, but also the guys who are sport fishermen, running charters, the guys at the marine docks, the gas docks, the boat yards, as well as teaming up with the people who wanted to see the whales and the marine birds. And all of us, including the scientific community, were able to pass a law that in 2019 prevented any more purse seine fishing for menhaden in New York. And when the rules went into effect at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, those fish started to come back. It's just been incredible to see all of the ramifications, whether it's the fall run for striped bass, the whales, the dolphins, the sharks, the bluefin tuna fishery coming back off of New York City. None of these things happened in a vacuum just because of menhaden, but you put all these things together, if you didn't have those forage fish back in high numbers, you wouldn't have all of these things coming back so close to shore here in New York. And we've gotten used to it now, and we do not want to give it up.
We can tell you, as scientists, what level of harvest is sustainable, but we can't tell society how they want to allocate that harvest. The menhaden don't care how they're killed. They don't care whether they're killed by a fishing net or a striped bass. But society has to make that choice.
All of the good science in the world is useless unless the culture and the spiritual values of the society can integrate those understandings into human actions on the planet.
How do we allocate this valuable resource? What duty do we have to allocate some to the ecosystem? What duty do we have to allocate some for other species that we also want to catch? What duty do we have to allocate some to the menhaden fishery? And most importantly to me, what duty do we have to allocate some for the future?
We know what we want as fishermen. We know what we want if we're concerned about whales and wildlife. And now we have examples here in New York because we can see it. We know what it looks like. It's not theoretical anymore. We definitely do not want to lose that. And we just want to have management goals stay in place so that we don't lose that.
Every interest is hurt by depletion. I think the ideal target is fisheries should make no perceptible dent in the abundance of what's out there. And then everybody who is engaged in taking some of that amount would find an ocean that is actually full and abundant and easy to find what it is you are looking for. And that would profit everybody and serve all interests.
We should all want to leave the world a better place than we found it. And that discussion of how do we allocate menhaden or any other resource is a really important societal discussion, and people need to be involved in that discussion.
And now if our panelists would like to come up to the stage, or I'll hand it over to Aaron and Jacob.
Jacob Steinberg, our esteemed filmmaker, is going to kick things off, and then we'll lay out how the run of show is going to work.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Explorers Club. Really hope you enjoyed the film. Thank you to Sergio, who's here with us right here, our editor, my right-hand man. There he is right there. We also have several people in the room who contributed footage. Thank you very much. We've got Galen, we've got Chris St. Lawrence here, we've got some of the participants, we've got our executive producer in the back there, Peter Hamilton. So thank you for everybody who was involved. This has been an extraordinary experience. Started back when I was filming Osprey. I learned about menhaden filming Osprey, which, as you can tell, are going through something right now, and it's real. It became personal for me, and the more I delved into menhaden, the more passionate I became, and I'm happy to be part of what is an extraordinary collaboration of people from all different disciplines at the forefront of what is a global initiative to protect forage species, the fundamental food source for the entire marine ecosystem. People are recognizing that as we continue to work and tell this story. It's a story that's not being told enough, but we here are at the forefront of telling that story, and it's a really important one. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Jacob, and thanks to everybody who helped put the film together. I hadn't seen it until this showing, so I was very, very delighted. So greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Menhaden Ambassador Hour. My name is Aaron Kornbluth. I run a small environmental consulting firm, more or less out of my home in the DC area, and I've been a member of the club since last year, thanks in part to Dr. Ellen Pickich on my right, and it's been a real pleasure to have gotten to know many of you in the room. I call many of you long time and some newer partners, friends, and partners in crime. And many of us have done some great work together over the years, including on Menhaden and other forage fish conservation. So this evening, we have a fantastic panel of experts who have been in the trenches working on Menhaden in one way, shape, or form for decades. And folks represent a wide variety of sectors up here, from the filmmaking industry to science and academia, to charter fishing operations, and the great history of this fishery and the Menhaden populations and their predators. The way we'll run tonight is I'll do a brief introduction of each of the panelists, and then they'll each speak for a few minutes. And at the end, we will open things up with hopefully about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So we're going to kick things off with my friend and longtime comrade in arms in fisheries management in the Northeast, Dr. Matt McKenzie, professor of history at UConn, who can talk your ear off about the history of all of the Northeast fisheries to the point of wishing you hadn't asked him to do so. But Matt, why don't you take it away and draw the history of this fish and fishery?
In 2 minutes, right?
In 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Or less.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. This has been bravo on the film. I was blown away by some of the footage, and thank you all to everyone who contributed to the production of it. Absolutely fantastic. I've been trying to figure out how to describe the history of this fishery in a short amount of time. And I think the most important thing that as a historian I can draw out of it is how different the history of this fishery is from every other fishery that we see on the eastern seaboard of the United States. This fishery has always been about an industrial input, whether it's fertilizer for agricultural fields for Native Americans or later colonists and antebellum farmers in the eastern seaboard, or more and particularly as sources of industrial inputs for oils and scraps and fertilizer, organic matter following the Civil War. No community relied upon this fish as food. There might be some archaeological evidence suggesting Native Americans ate them, but it's not overwhelming. But certainly Europeans, when they got here, did not eat these. And that changes the relationship of a community to a species. There's no one out there who sees Menhaden as part of their foodways. We don't have a Christmas Menhaden dinner. Thank God. It would be horrible. But what that means is this very important fish is kind of left on its own because no one really cares. And as a result of that, and because of the timing of mechanization and industrialization, you see this fishery being prosecuted not by artisanal subsistence fishermen or small-scale commercial operators that were getting slowly bigger and bigger but still having bases of operation throughout the region. Rather, it was jumped into by industrialists very quickly after the Civil War as whale oil started to become less abundant, and they needed some sort of oil and organic matter for industrial products and for fertilizers. From that moment on, this fishery was prosecuted not by fishing community, but by industrialists, industrial capitalists, and investors. And very early, this is the first fishery that you see the application of steam technology to. It's the first fishery that you see a large-scale national organization of oil producers forming to lobby in Washington. That's the 1870s. And you see this organization using that political power to try to push through legislation that in the 1880s that would allow them to basically fish the way they wanted to, regardless of what state wishes were. That is a very different style of fishery, because what that means is that the people driving this fishery are being driven by investments and profits, not necessarily by the quality of the work, the quality of the fish, or sustaining a community. It also means that the decisions that were being made about how this fishery is governed was about extracting as much out of the resource and out of the people working that resource as they possibly could. As the film mentioned, the fishery contracted towards the Virginia Capes, largely because of a lack of abundance, but also because in the Reconstruction, these industrialists realized that they could get really skilled labor for very cheap in the Reconstruction South. And so they shifted their operations down to the Capes to take advantage of cheaper labor, where work by Barbara Garrity Blake, fantastic work about the African-American history of this fishery, reveals one of a community getting pressed pretty hard as they are being asked to press stocks of fish pretty hard. It's one of the first fisheries that has aviation planes looking for them right after World War I. It's insane. I sent that to you. It's crazy. So that makes this fishery very different from all others. And it means that as a community of people who are concerned about it, we have a tougher job convincing other people why they should care. Because frankly, most people haven't about this fishery for a long time. And I think that's a historical problem as much as it is an awareness problem. So there you go. 1 minute under.
Nicely done. Thank you. Next on our panel is my friend and esteemed Dr. Ellen Pikich, a fellow member of the Explorers Club, and one of the folks who first told me about the Explorers Club and sponsored me to get in. Ellen and I have worked behind the scenes and in the trenches on working with some of the Menhaden fishery managers to make them use the best available science, much of which is all in Ellen's head. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the importance of menhaden and other forage species?
Thanks, Aaron. I actually don't have to turn this on. It's on. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for coming to hear about the most important fish in the sea. I'm going to take a step back and say that the lessons that you can draw from menhaden really apply to many, many more fish all around the world. Menhaden are a type of forage species, a forage fish, and that's defined not so much by taxonomy, but by the crucial ecological role that they and other forage species play. These fish are able to consume plankton. Not that many fish can do that. Most fish have to eat bigger things. And they're able to consume the smallest plankton in the sea and bring that, by being consumed themselves as prey, they transfer energy up to the higher trophic levels. And that's why we saw in the film things like whales and striped bass and osprey that depend very much on this intermediary group of species called forage fish. I got involved with forage fish at a time when people didn't care about any of them, pretty much. But we started to realize that a lot of them are being taken out of the water all over the world, and there needed to be a scientific synthesis and understanding of this group of species. So I was asked to chair something called the LenFest Forage Fish Task Force. It was a global task force, 13 scientists, multidisciplinary from all around the world. We worked for a period of 4 years. We did 9 case studies. We looked at data from 72 ecosystems. And we did a lot of original data analysis and modeling ourselves. And through all this, we came up with findings. And these are general findings that apply to all species of forage fish. And menhaden is a good example. You can see in what people say about menhaden these general principles. So one of them is we found that these forage species are very vulnerable. They tend to be small-bodied, short-lived. Because they're so short-lived, they're also very sensitive to environmental conditions. They go through boom and bust cycles. And that's why it's really important to keep a certain amount of them in the water in order to basically support everything else, all other life in the ocean. Another thing was, as the forage fish go, so do their predators. If the forage fish go down, the predators go down in abundance. The difference is that being short-lived, the forage fish can bounce back theoretically quickly, but long-lived species that depend on them can't. So, for example, there was a terrible collapse in Peru. The Peruvian anchovy fishery that happened in the early 70s. At the time, the anchovy fishery made up 10% of the world fish catch. That's one species, made up 10% of the world catch. When that fishery collapsed, seabirds, marine mammals perished all along the coast of Peru. And some of those species have never come back because of their different life history. Another finding, based on these 72 ecosystem models, is that these fish are actually worth, if you do an economic analysis, they are worth about twice as much if you leave them in the water than if you take them out in a net. And that paper was published separately, and it's cited, it's still used today in a lot of arguments of why. How did we come up with this? We looked at how much a predator eats of the forage species and what the value of that predator is, which in many cases is much more than the value of the forage species such as menhaden. So our task force came up with these findings. We came up with recommendations. One of the major, I thought it was going to be, as chair of the task force, the most controversial recommendation was that there be no new forage fish fisheries. I thought the task force would never agree to that, but they did unanimously and easily. And it turns out that of all the recommendations we made, that one has been taken up by more fisheries agencies all around the world, in the United States and elsewhere. Obviously, menhaden was already going. It was already a fishery that was being pursued, and that's not the case. But anyway, I think I'll stop there. Thanks,
Thank you,
Erin.
Ellen. I have probably cited Ellen's publications at least 1,000 times in the work that I've done in the past. Next on our list is my friend and longtime partner in crime in some of the menhaden management world, Captain Paul Eidman, who runs his own charter fishing operation, as well as the nonprofit Menhaden Defenders, one of the premier environmental nonprofits that's working to advocate for menhaden conservation and the use of best available science in that. And Paul and I have worked for many years together to try to convince the fishery managers along the Atlantic coast to use the best available science and make wise, long-term, sustainable choices. Paul, you're up.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful place. This is my second time being here. First time was with Ellen again. But as Aaron said, I own a charter business. I'm also a naturalist, and I am the founder of Menhaden Defenders. I've been fishing the New York Bight now for 30 years, which is crazy when I think about it. And I've had the privilege and the heartbreak of watching our ecosystem change dramatically right before my eyes. As a founder of Menhaden Defenders, I stood on the front lines alongside dozens of organizations and individuals to challenge the last industrial harvester of Atlantic menhaden, a company called Omega Protein. And this single company has been grinding up these vital fish into fish meal and fish oil for dog and cat food, for agricultural feed, and completely ignoring the critical role that the menhaden play in the food web. It's fascinating to mention that before the fishery catch cap or quota was implemented back in 2012, this area, our local waters, was pretty quiet. There were only 5 known, that's 5, known humpback whales in this area. Bald eagles you never saw. And if you did see a dolphin anywhere else in New Jersey beside Cape May, you talked about it for weeks. Then, I'm going to get all choked up.
It's okay.
Then something remarkable happened. In the 3 years following the catch cap, the menhaden population began to recover, and the ocean came roaring back to life. Striped bass fishing exploded. Whales became a common sight. The bald eagles returned. Osprey nests began appearing all over the shoreline. And top predators like tuna came in closer than anyone had ever seen in decades. It was like we got a glimpse of what this ecosystem wants to be, the way it used to be, if we just simply give it a chance. So today, just a decade later, Gotham Whale, a sister organization to ours, has documented more than 400 humpback whales in this area. There's dozens of bald eagles around, countless osprey, and all of them have been drawn here by the comeback of the humble little menhaden. But here's the thing. Menhaden weren't always the primary forage fish. For generations, we, meaning the fishermen in my area of New Jersey, we relied on river herring for the first pulse of spring. They migrated by the thousands through our local streams, and their arrival jump-started the entire food chain. But now, they've collapsed down to 8% of their historic population due to massive bycatch from offshore trawlers targeting other species. So the menhaden have literally stepped in to fill that void. So now they're carrying the weight of an entire food web that used to be supported by multiple species. If we lose them too, and we allow this overexploitation to continue and resume, we're not just risking one fishery, we're staring down a catastrophic collapse of our coastal ecosystem. So tonight, I leave you with this: of all the rabbit holes you could explore the story of the most important fish in the sea. That's a book, by the way, because that's what menhaden are. They are the heartbeat of the Atlantic. If we're serious about ocean health, about biodiversity, about restoring balance, we need to fight to protect them. And organizations like Menhaden Defenders need your help to do this. Yeah, we're small and we're scrappy and we survive solely on donations. And we've already made a huge impact and we plan to do even more. Thank you so much.
Paul, I want to thank you for giving us just even a tiny window into how personal an issue this has been for you for decades, perhaps longer for you than any of us in this room, from both a professional and personal perspective, so thank you for that. I'm going to round things out, and then we're going to open the conversation up to the audience for questions. So I have a science background, marine ecology. I've been in the DC area since 2008, working at several federal agencies and the Pew Charitable Trusts. I have about 15 years specifically working on menhaden conservation and advocacy. Menhaden have gotten into my blood. They are, they comprise to this day the second largest fishery by volume in the US. The fishery actually stretches from Texas to Maine. And every year, the industrial fleets alone catch about 1.5 billion pounds, second only to the pollock fishery off Alaska. Pollock are what we eat in fish sticks, for example. But over the course of decades, even as far back as the 1870s, this is a fishery that has become increasingly institutionalized, industrialized, mechanized, to the point now where not only do you see the impact of the fishery being prosecuted at such large scales on the water, but in every fishery management boardroom from Texas to Maine, and as well in DC and Congress and the White House, so on and so forth, the influence of this fishery. They have teams of some of the best paid lobbyists. They have created scientific quasi-scientific partnerships to be able to push out some of the science that they feel is necessary to control the narrative. And so it has been this ongoing push and pull dating back again to the late 1800s between the fishery, that component of the fishery, and everybody else who cares about menhaden, whether they're in the ecotourism industry or they're a small-scale subsistence fisher or among the conservation-oriented among us. And after decades and decades of pushing at the body that manages the Atlantic menhaden fishery from Florida to Maine, many of us here in the room and some folks in the audience and thousands of other folks across the country really raised a chorus of voices over the course of a number of years to convince the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission first to create the catch cap or quota that Paul mentioned a minute ago that ended up leaving, by my estimate, probably about 1 billion fish in the water every year to serve their ecological function. And similar to an interest rate, that is something that has compounded over time. And that's why we now see the glory of abundant biodiverse life off of the mid-Atlantic and even up into southern and northern New England in the Gulf of Maine. It has not been easy, and getting the fishery managers to make use of the best available science, like much of which came out of the Lenfest Forage Fish Task Force that Ellen led, has been such a challenge. And whither the decision makers go, so does the menhaden population. Largely, the level of influence by the fishery on the managers from the local to national levels has been a dominant force, with entities like Menhaden Defenders being scrappy as they are and trying to convince the powers that be in those decision-making positions to make wise, long-term steward types of decisions. But it's very hard for the conservation community and the small recreational and small commercial fishing communities and the scientific community to have that continual presence. Well, back in 2017, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission kicked off a process whereby they formally considered adopting a completely new paradigm to managing Atlantic menhaden from Florida to Maine. And recommendations that came out of the Lenfest Forage Fish Task Force work were among several options that were considered by the Commission that sought, all told, to manage menhaden with an eye towards their important ecological role. And that is one of the first times worldwide that a fishery has been considered for management, not just for the needs of the fishery and the people who rely upon it, but those indirect needs of the predators and the people who rely upon the predators. So there was a multi-year back and forth process with tons of technical jargon and probably millions of dollars worth of federal and state agency staff time and modeling resources that ultimately culminated in a 2020 decision whereby menhaden are now managed with a specific allocation for their population for striped bass, weakfish, bluefish, and several other key predator fish. So as Ellen indicated, menhaden are an example that we think, that many of us think, can be used for the world to see that there is a better and more modern way to manage these important, really these critical forage fish. So I'm very excited to be, again, at the forefront of what Jacob mentioned is a potential very large global impact campaign whereby we want to lift up the voices of the tiny little stinky, oily forage fish who cannot speak for themselves, and have people really understand better the value of these fish and how we can use modern science, community engagement, and the like to do a better job of managing them. And so with that, I'm going to take the MC's prerogative of asking my colleagues here the first question, and then we'll open it up to an audience Q&A. So given what we've all shared tonight and seen in the video about menhaden's historical importance, ecological role, and management evolution, what do each of you believe is the single most important lesson from the menhaden story that could in fact be applied to other marine conservation challenges? Sure.
So I'll go back to something I said was one of our recommendations: no new forage fish fisheries. I mean, what menhaden shows is that when there are already so many vested interests in place, so many people who depend on this for their livelihoods, there's so much money involved, so many lobbyists involved, that it's really, really hard to make progress from there. But if you nip it in the bud and you realize that these forage fish are so precious and we're better off leaving them alone, leaving them in the water, then you don't have to worry about ever getting to this point. I also wanted to mention that the task force did come up with a report. This is the executive summary of the report. It's called Little Fish, Big Impact, and it is available for downloading for those of you who are interested.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, you have to.
Cheers. I guess if I had to go in a different direction than your question, if I could, I don't think the answer is in the fish. I think it's the answer lies in sustainable substitutes. And society needs to retool, even though somebody in Omega Proteins' great-grandpappy had a right to catch these fish. It was a different time back then. And then when you throw in these 180-foot ships with a fleet of spotter planes and a relentless just efficiency of doing this, it's just not fair anymore. You know, it used to be when it was 40-foot boat, it was totally different. But now it's epically, and as Bruce Franklin used to say, who was the author of the book, The Most Important Fish in the Sea, there is not a single thing or product that Omega Protein makes that can't be replaced by something sustainable. And I think that's really the message that I would pass along. You know, we have all types of alternatives for protein now. And you don't have to remove a creature from another fish's mouth or a creature's mouth to feed us.
Matt, Jacob.
I'm going to agree with everything they just said. Far more intelligent what I'm about to say. I think it's the takeaway that I see is don't underestimate the political sophistication of this industry. It was always this politically sophisticated. 1880s, they pushed a test case all the way up to the Supreme Court, lost there, and then they pushed the Latham Bill, which was they nearly won with that in the 1884 congressional sessions. And that's an amazing amount of political sophistication and connections that this industry has always had for over a century and a half now. And so I think, and this I think is true for a lot of other areas where we're going to be, trying to get forage fish protections, river herring in particular, is that these institutions know what they're up against. They know that we're fighting them, and we need to, not bring teddy bears to gunfights.
I think the message has been clearly stated as to the importance of the species in the ecosystem. So I'll take off my naturalist hat and put on my storyteller hat. And I think I see this issue through the lens of storytelling, in that if you communicate to people effectively enough, this story feels wrong. All of those boats that you saw, removing that critical species, that belongs to one company. For what? I mean, this issue thrives in darkness. As Matt said, people don't make the connection between their food and this fish because we don't eat them. But if you can communicate to people the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in, and the history of this fishery, and connect it to people and allow them to understand, and ask them to think for themselves, why is this happening? It doesn't make any sense. It's an argument worth making, and it's an argument that inherently you can understand, as long as the message is communicated effectively. And that's why storytelling and bringing together so much information that we have data, we have experiences, we have years of visual observation, we have a hundreds of year history to tell. We just have to bring it to people and connect it to their children, their children's future. And I think that when you put that into perspective of the most important fish in the sea, I think you'll realize the importance of the work that everyone is doing here and we're trying to continue to do.
Thank you all. All right, to the audience. Questions, comments, criticisms, ideas?
Thank you. This is so enlightening. It was incredible. Your point about I'm pretty loud. Your point about Peru, is the menhaden ubiquitous worldwide? Is the decline worldwide? Whereabouts are we looking other than the eastern U.S.?
So forage species are everywhere. So the reason I call them species is that they're not all fish. In Antarctica, the whole food web depends on krill. Krill is not a fish, but it's a forage species. And we do have fishing going on down there for krill. And sometimes people think way too much and way too localized, and that's impacting the Antarctic ecosystem. So I think the message I was trying to bring is that what's happening with menhaden is happening in too many places all around the world. But there are places where people have made the decision, managers have made the decision, let's not start a fishery here. In California, the California Fish and Game was the first agency within 2 weeks of this report coming out to ban any new forage fish fisheries. The Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. So there are still species like this that are not being fished. The other thing I want to do is give a second answer to your question. One of the lessons of menhaden is that despite how difficult it's been, we've come a long way, right, Aaron? I mean, we won ecological reference points. It took like a decade. And during that time, Aaron and I used to text each other back and forth all the time. I got scientists to write a scientist sign-on letter about the importance of menhaden and managing them from an ecological perspective. And, time would go by, things that we were advocating for got defeated, but we would get up and get back in the fight and try again, and eventually we did win that fight. So another message is don't give up.
Like it. Another question.
Hi, Ree Kirkpatrick. I'm a Virginian and a professional mariner, so this is a hot topic for us down where we're from. I've been in Cockerell's Creek more times than I can name, which is where that video was filmed. I've had some experience running offshore of the eastern shore in which I witnessed some bycatch from the harvesting of menhaden, and I was curious if you all had any experience with having done any research on the bycatch from the industry, and how that would also impact the other species.
Do you want to mention what you've seen?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there's the Atlantic menhaden fishery and the Gulf menhaden fishery. Their scale is vastly different, as is their regulation. As is their bycatch. So I'll just, in the Gulf, for instance, in the Gulf fishery, they catch more, the menhaden harvesters catch more red drum as bycatch than the entire red drum fishery and all of the other fisheries combined, they catch as bycatch. Those are fish that are killed and dumped overboard. So bycatch is a big deal, a very, very big deal. I've seen it on the water with the boats, and it's not as intense in the Chesapeake as it is down in the Gulf, but yes, bycatch is real.
Just quickly to add to that, the industry will often make the claim that the percentage of their bycatch is relatively small. It's somewhere around 1% to 2%, which by many standards would be considered a clean fishery. However, when you're talking about 1.5 billion pounds caught, even 1% of that is a lot. And as Jacob said, more red drum than are actually allocated via the quota to some of these other fisheries. The industry has very successfully pushed back on decision makers that at times over the course of the last several decades have wanted to put in more monitoring requirements to see what types of activities are actually taking place out on the water, including bycatch of non-target species, including fishing in places where they're not supposed to be fishing, like marine protected areas. But the industry has time and time again fought that back to the point where we have almost no data on it. All right, next question.
Thank you. My name is Gabriel Merman. I'm an environmental entrepreneurship student at Duke. My question is more on the economic side of how do you encourage these industries and like the Omega protein, how do you encourage them economically, like what is happening right now and what needs to happen in the future so that they change industries?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can help them economically. I think you have to, unfortunately, battle against what is in their vested interests. I also think, the idea that people don't care about these little fish, well, look how much people do care. We saw Paul almost come to tears sitting next to me here. I think the thing is to focus on what people do care about. Most people care about whales. They want to see whales out there. They care about striped bass. They care about other species. If we can focus on the predators and how we're losing those predators because they don't have enough food, I think that that is a good way to try to change the way that the world looks at this.
Can I try?
Sure.
If we use an example, Purina. Okay, Purina makes dog food and cat food. And by the way, I see more Menhaden in dog food than I do in cat food. Play with that one. So if we take it from a consumer perspective, if Purina did research and found out that they could use soy or some other substitute protein in our pets, our companion pets, as Omega Protein calls it, as the protein source, the demand, now Purina is one of Omega's largest customers. If we as consumers demand that Menhaden is not used in our dog's food, then we would shift their end goal. I know it sounds like a big one, but it reminds me of, if anybody's old enough to remember, the dolphin-safe tuna. So they used to put labels on tuna cans that say that no dolphin were harmed while this tuna was processed. It's the same exact thing. We take a Menhaden-free sticker and put it on a bag of dog food so the consumer knows to choose that one over something that Omega Protein supports. And that's the way I would do it.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
Hi, my name is Mai Fahmy. I'm a terrestrial ecologist, so this has all been very informative for me. But sort of along the same lines of the answer that you've given, because Menhaden seemed to be sort of invisible, we don't have a Menhaden Christmas dinner, what industries would be most effective to, as you said, target? Is it Omega Protein? Are they the largest exploiters? And how can we use our spending power as individuals to send messages to this industry? Essentially what I'm asking is, what can we do?
Have you got all night? There are organizations like Whole Foods, the Marine Stewardship Council, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and their Seafood Watch program that have looked into the sustainability of the harvest of Menhaden and other forage fish, and they do apply market pressure. And for example, Whole Foods tries to follow the recommendations of the Seafood Watch program, whereby they do not sell any products that have been denoted as being caught unsustainably. You can very simply let some of those entities, the resellers of the products, know that you do not want to buy a product like this. You can certainly use the power of the purse. But I'd say one of the most direct ways to influence the management of these fisheries is to let your voice be heard by the actual fisheries managers themselves. There are very open and relatively open and relatively transparent processes by which these fisheries are managed, and that is really the first place. Applying market pressure requires generally a decent amount of funding and a really well tooled and oiled campaign, and a lot of people at the table. I think the best approaches are ones that take kind of a mixed methods approach, where you're influencing decision making directly, you're conducting science to strategically address policy questions, and you're applying market pressure, as well as, you know, good old lawsuits. But there's a role for everybody to play in moving the needle forward on forage fish conservation. So thank you for your question. And with that, I am delighted to say that I think that's the end of our panel, and I want to say a huge thanks to my friends and colleagues up here and everybody who made this panel possible tonight.
Thank you for the amazingly enlightening panel. I love Menhaden, so I hope everybody else has become Menhaden. If the panels could stay up for a second. And I would love to now reveal the winning challenge coin design, and also invite Majorica up, because we have a certificate of appreciation for her. Luis, can we put up the image? Because it's a stunning coin. And we will. Here's your. And as is tradition, Majorica is going to do the ceremony of thanking our panelists. And as you can see, she chose the salmon to highlight for her coin. She could choose one of the 3 ambassadors. So I hope everybody comes back for tomorrow and Thursday's ambassador hours. Tomorrow is salmon and Thursday is osprey. So we'll tie it all together with more how important the Menhaden are. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you stay for the evening program.